Good evening. I'm Joe Mosca, former Dean of the Centofanti College of Health and Human Services, and a current member of the James and Coralie Centofanti Foundation Distribution Committee. On behalf of Youngstown State University, I welcome you all tonight to the symposium. Please acknowledge with me some guests that are here tonight with us. President Johnson, Bill Johnson, and his wife, Leanne. And also with us is Mark Graham, who is the chairperson of the Centofanti Foundation Distribution Committee. Mark? Thank you. Before moving into the symposium, I want to acknowledge the generosity of our donor. The James and Coralie Centofanti Charitable Foundation has provided significant giving to the university for the last 12 years. The commitment of financial support from the foundation has exceeded over $2.75 million. Notably, it has provided critical funding for academic scholarships to our students who are in need, broad support for veteran student services, the naming and accompanying program endowment for the James and Coralie Centofanti School of Nursing, and of course, it's established and sustained the Centofanti Symposium, which started in 2012. Please join me in thanking the Centofanti Foundation for its magnanimous support to Youngstown State and to this symposium. The Centofanti Symposium is a medium for bringing nationally and internationally renowned speakers to our Youngstown community. Beyond providing knowledge and entertainment, a primary goal of the symposium is to raise awareness of the difficulties and challenges facing vulnerable groups in our society, while at the same time promoting a spirit of shared responsibility and common concern for human dignity. Tonight's symposium features Emmy and Peabody Award-winning filmmaker, literary scholar, and journalist Henry Louis Gates Jr. Dr. Gates is an acclaimed cultural critic and institution builder. He is the Alphonse Fletcher University Professor and Director of the Hutchins Center for African American Research at Harvard University. Dr. Gates' groundbreaking genealogy and genetics series, Finding Your Roots, will begin its 11th season on PBS in January. Moderating tonight's event is YSU's own Dr. Timothy Francisco, Professor of English and World Languages, WYSU host, and Director of the Center for Working Class Studies. At this time, please join me in welcoming Dr. Henry Louis Gates.
Thank you so very much. If I had known I was going to get that warm introduction and this warm welcome, I would have been here yesterday or the day before. I'll tell you a funny story. I have sort of lecture notes and a few pictures that were supposed to be right here on the podium, and they're not here. But you know what? I can do it without any notes. How about that? Somebody stole my notes. Came to Youngstown, horseman, so cold. Youngstown giveth, Youngstown taketh away. But I've never been here before, and so it's great. There was a black family in Piedmont, West Virginia. I'm going to tell you about that. And they migrated here at the height of industrial production. And they used to come back for the annual colored picnic, paper mill picnic, as we call it. And so they were from this magical place called Youngstown, and I always wanted to go to Youngstown. So you all brought me here. Give it up for Professor Mosca, please, for that wonderful introduction. And the president of the university skipped Thursday night football for me. Can you believe it? Give it up for President Johnson, please. Thank you. I love Thursday night football myself, so I guess I'm giving it up for me too. Let's start with the video.
Oh man, that is so cool. Happy birthday to finding your roots.
This is so intense.
Really?
Unbelievable.
It's crazy.
Wow, this is amazing.
Blew my mind.
My great-granddad? Yes. Was a candy salesman? He was a candy man.
Yes. You said this is my dad's
That's your dad's
great-grandpa,
right?
right? Yo, this is wild.
I asked the question.
Yeah.
Got the answer. And now I'm dumbfounded.
Who do I come from?
Yeah, and how can you ever find out? Well, I was told I couldn't.
This information is stuff that we need in order to feel whole. It's heartbreaking.
These are your immigrant ancestors.
I want to shake their hand and give them a hug and a kiss.
Did you vote?
He registered to vote.
It makes me feel a great deal of admiration. Sorry for my ancestors. Always make you proud of me. I'm always carrying myself to make you proud of me.
Do you feel more Jewish
Super Jewish.
than you did 2 hours ago?
I feel so much more Jewish.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's powerful. It feels like I have a home.
God, that's satisfying.
Oh, it's crazy. This is lunacy, man. Turn the page, meet your DNA cousin.
Oh no.
No! My husband's gonna freak out.
No.
Yep.
Viola Davis is my cousin?
Who knew? Boy, this took a turn that never expected, never anticipated this.
Are you kidding me?
No.
That's insane.
Megan, can you hear me?
I can. Hi.
I'm pleased to tell you you're going to be in Finding Your Roots.
Are you serious?
I'm serious.
Oh my gosh.
I can't tell you what we found, but what we found was you.
Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I'm dumbstruck.
Oh my goodness. Are we really this close? Are we really this close?
Oh.
These are all the
My.
ancestors we uncovered in our research.
Oh, wow.
That's gorgeous.
This is a massive gift to our whole family.
This has been one of the most enlightening, fulfilling moments I've felt in a long, long time.
I am forever changed. I am forever changed.
Find your roots. So how did a guy with a PhD in English literature from the University of Cambridge end up making PBS series about genealogy and genetics? Well, it all started the day I met this lady. By the way, the reason I'm looking down is there's a competence monitor here so I can see the slides, if you can see up there. The day I met this lady. Her name is Jane Gates. She was born in 1819, as you can see. She died in 1888. Now, obviously, didn't meet her, literally, but it was the day I first saw this photograph. And I actually remember the day, because it was the day we buried this man. This is my grandfather, my father's father, Edward St. Lawrence Gates. Very bad picture there on the left. And this is his obituary in the Cumberland, Maryland Evening Times. Cumberland, Maryland, all the Gates are from Cumberland, Maryland. Cumberland's halfway between Pittsburgh and Washington. And the Colemans, my mother's family, lived on the West Virginia side. in Piedmont, West Virginia, where the paper mill was. So I grew up in a factory town, a paper mill town, 25 miles away. I'm a country boy. You know, I grew up fishing and hunting. The first day of deer season was a holiday. When you're 12, you got a 410. This is not exactly the typical African-American experience, you know what I'm talking about? But black people are everywhere, even in the hills of West Virginia. So, he died on, the obituary appeared on July 1st, 1960, and his funeral was the next day, July 2nd. This is, this is my grandfather's baby picture. Edward St. Lawrence Gates. He was born in 1879 and he died in 1960. You can see him being a typical little black boy, right? Typical little African American. My grandfather was so white we called him Casper behind his back. He was the eldest son. I keep trying to get up. He was the eldest son of Edward Gates and Maud Scott Gates. And that man at the back of the room is my great-grandfather. That is my grandfather's father. And he too looks like a white man. And he was born in 1857. My grandfather was born in 1879 on our family farm in Patterson's Creek, West Virginia. 200-acre farm. That's Daddy. Let me go back. Can I make this go back? Yeah. Now make it go. There you go. That, I got it. Out of control here. Bear with me. All right. That's our family farm. We don't own it anymore. That's the Gates farm in Patterson's Creek, West Virginia. That's my great-grandfather, Edward, and his wife, Maud Scott. Edward died in 1945. I was born in 1950. So I never met them. And this man is, that's my dad. And he was born in 1913, and he lived to be 97 and a half, and he passed away in 2010. Now, Daddy took my brother and me. This is my favorite family picture. That's my beautiful mom. That's my dad. That's my brother Paul, who's an oral surgeon on your right. And the kid sitting in his mama's lap, passionately defending the Second Amendment, that's me. I had a gun collection like you wouldn't believe. All kind of toy gun. I was like obsessed with guns. My dad took my brother and me upstairs in his parents' house after the funeral. Now, the funeral for my grandfather was at the Kite Funeral Home in Cumberland, Maryland. And all the black people in town were there, because my grandfather was a prominent man in town. And Daddy took me by the hand. I'm 9 years old. He took me by the hand and took me up to the open casket. And my brother was there too. And I'd never been that close to a corpse before. So I was petrified. But I was astonished. So I was very nervous, and I looked at the casket, and I was astonished at how white how white my grandfather looked. If he looked so white with blood coursing through his veins that we called him Casper, imagine how white he looked dead. He looked like he had been coated with alabaster and sprinkled with baby powder, right? So I started to laugh. I was holding my father's hand, and I started to giggle because I heard a noise from my father. Now, why would I think my father was laughing at his father's funeral? Because my father was the funniest person on the face of the earth. My father was so funny, he made Red Fox look like an undertaker. So I thought my father was laughing at how ridiculously white the undertaker had made his father look too. So I started to giggle, and when I looked up, it was the most, I was mortified. The noise I heard, tears. My father was crying. I thought I was dead. I thought my social life had ended at the age of 9. But nobody noticed little old me, because everybody in the funeral home was fixated on my dad weeping, at his father's open casket. So I was so embarrassed that I started to cry too. And my dad, nobody ever knew except me. So I'm making this grand confession here in Youngstown in front of us. And so we buried my grandfather in the Gates family plot at the Gates of Episcopalians, the Coleman's Methodists, at the Episcopal Cemetery, which was integrated, unlike all the other cemeteries in the area where I was born and grew up. So we buried Pop Gates, we call him, in the Gates family plot, where Jane Gates is buried. And then we went back to the Gates family home, which Jane Gates purchased. Now, Jane Gates was a slave. She was a midwife. She purchased a house in an all-white neighborhood in Cumberland, Maryland, for $1,200 in cash in 1870. Jane had 5 kids, and they all looked white. All right? So you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes, and you don't need to do a DNA test to figure out where that money came from. But I will get there in a minute. So my dad took my brother and me upstairs in his parents' house. We had never been upstairs in our grandparents' house. My grandparents would say goodnight and just disappear magically up the steps like Harry Potter or something. And, you know, in those days, ladies and gentlemen, we had standards. You know, we had principles. You didn't call an adult by their first name. You know, I still refer to my parents are long dead. I refer to their friends, their best friend, Miss Mary and Mr. Ozzie. Never would have dreamed ever to address them by their first name. I've had students come up to me in Harvard and say, well, what am I supposed to call you? And I look at them and say, do not hesitate to call me Professor Gates. What is wrong with you? You can't call an adult by their first name. We couldn't step on a grave, couldn't sit on a bed. You know, we had standards then. We need those times back, I'm gonna tell you that. So, my brother and I were upstairs, it was like going to Mars. And we have no idea why we're upstairs. And Daddy takes us out into their bedroom, and off the bedroom was the sun porch. Our family still owns that home. Now it's on the historic registry. My cousin John Gates and his wife Sook own it. So out on the sun porch was a big armoire and big wardrobe. And Daddy opened it, and it was full of bank ledgers. My grandfather was a janitor at the First National Bank in Cumberland, Maryland. And he was stealing these bank ledgers. And this armoire was full of these bank ledgers, just like this. And Rocky, my brother, we didn't know what the heck was going on. And Daddy starts taking them out and looking for something. One after the other he's crouched on the ground like this. And Rocky and I are looking over his shoulder. This is a page of one of the scrapbooks. And he was gluing them. You remember Elmer's glue? I don't know if that was what he was using, but it was like that. And he was clipping newspapers. He loved to clip newspapers. And he was fascinated. I could see very quickly that he was fascinated by every form of death. Airplane accidents, railroad accidents, automobile accidents. And then, because these date from the late 30s and through the 40s, the daily war dead. For the young people here, and during World War II, the local newspaper, Youngtown's newspaper, whatever it's called, would print the name of anyone who had died in World War II. And he clipped all of those descriptions of the war dead. So, but he also was a race man, as we call it. Though he looked white, he could have passed for white. He, one article was the first Negro judge elected in New York City in 1942, which I thought was pretty cool. So finally, after going through 6 or 7 of these scrapbooks, Daddy said, I found it. And this is what he found. This is an obituary, and it's dated January 8th, 1888. And if you could read it clearly in the part that's circled on your left, it basically says, died this day in Cumberland, Maryland, Jane Gates, an estimable colored woman. An estimable colored woman. And then Daddy pulled this photograph out between the leaves of that scrapbook. And he said, this is Jane Gates. She's a midwife. She was a slave. This is the oldest Gates we've ever been able to identify. I never want you to forget her name, and I never want you to forget her face. And my brother and I looked at this odd-looking lady, and as you can see, she's dressed in her midwifery outfit, and I had never heard her name before, never seen an image of her, just out of the blue. Daddy was so moved by the death of his father and burying him in the family plot where Jane is buried, that I guess that motivated him to come back and tell us the story and show us these scrapbooks. So we stared at her. My brother and I looked at each other. Daddy shut the scrapbook, gathered up all the rest of them on the ground, put them back in the armoire. We went downstairs for the repast, and then we drove 25 miles home along with Tommy to Piedmont, West Virginia, which is where the paper mill was across the bridge. And my father worked 2 jobs. He was a janitor. He worked at the paper mill in the daytime, and it was a union official. We got that working class institute right there. And he was a janitor at the phone company in the evening. And because he had 2 jobs, we were the wealthiest black people in the town. Piedmont, West Virginia, Piedmont means foot of the mountain, was an Irish-Italian paper mill town. And 2,500 people. I started school in 1956 with 24 kids, and we were together for 12 years. 36 graduated in my senior class. Irish and Italian paper mill town with a handful of black people. And it was a nurturing, wonderful, warm place. But because my dad worked 2 jobs, we were the wealthiest black people in town. Now, I didn't know I was poor until I went to Yale. And then I took a sociology class, and I'm like, oh, damn, I've been poor all these years. Nobody told me. And I tell you that only so that you know that I can explain what I'm about to say. My brother and I always had our own bedroom. We always had the nicest house of the black people in our town. I had my own bedroom. I had my own bookcase. I had my own desk. And on the desk next to my bed sat a red Webster's Dictionary. You know the old-fashioned Webster's Dictionary? I still love those dictionaries. And the last thing I did before I went to bed, ladies and gentlemen, I looked up the word estimable. Because I didn't know what it meant. And I thought, wow, if that funny-looking lady is estimable, maybe I'm estimable too. The next day was July 3rd. Now, the paper mill, Westvaco, had separate, segregated picnics. So our town was very liberal. It sounds ironic for me to say that, but it was very liberal. But everything social was segregated. Why do I say it was liberal? Because schools integrated in 1955. Brown v. Board in 1954. Schools integrated without Rosa Parks, without Martin Luther King in 1955. Nobody knows why. There were very few black people, relatively speaking. But I have a theory, and that theory was that, basketball is very big in West Virginia. And even the head of the Ku Klux Klan would know that the basketball team was going to be a hell of a lot better if they let these black guys into the school. And if they kept them out. No, I think the people just were good-hearted people. And they just did the right thing. So 1955, schools integrated. 1956, I started first grade, so I went to the white school. But everything social. We couldn't date white kids. There was a big town mill picnic. There was a white one, and there was a colored one, as we called it. And the same for the 4th of July. And remember, this is July the 3rd. So I go to the colored 4th of July picnic the day before. And on the way back, I asked Daddy to buy me a composition book. And he didn't ask me why, he just did. And that night, July 3rd, 60, in front of her 12-inch black and white TV, I interviewed my parents about what only years later, ladies and gentlemen, I've learned is called your genealogy or your family tree. I wanted to know how I was connected to this funny-looking lady who was something called a midwife. I also looked that up too. I wanted to know how someone with my physical features could be descended from a grandfather so white that, he looked like a ghost. I wanted to try to put it together. I didn't have the words that I'm using tonight. I only had the instinct. But I was driven by instinct to write it all down. And I was able to get back to my great-great-grandmother, Jane Gates, on my father's side, and on Mama's side, to my great-great-grandmother and great-great-grandfather. But remember, Jane had 5 children. And as I said, they all looked white. My great-grandfather was born in 1857 in slavery, like Jane was. And he went to his grave in 1945 not knowing the identity of his father. Jane only told her 5 children that their father was white and they all had the same father. But she never disclosed his identity. And every time I would go by the Gates plot in the Roseville Cemetery, just woofing, I'd say, "Grandma, I'm going to out you, Grandma. I'm going to tell you a secret. It's going to take me my whole life, but I'm going to tell you a secret." So, I was just a kid. I would lose the composition book. I'd buy another one. We'd be in front of our TV gradually grew. 24 inches, then it was color. I would interview my parents all over again. My dad would say, "God damn it, boy, I told you this information. How many times I have to tell you? Jane, blah, blah, blah." And I go, "Daddy, I just want to know. I just want to know." All right, so cut to 1977. What is the greatest thing happening in the history of television? Roots. I watched it like how many of you here watched Roots? Yeah. Wasn't it great? Guess who scored the music? Quincy Jones. Let's give it up for Quincy Jones, ladies and gentlemen. So like everybody else in America, I watch Roots. You could say I had a serious case of Roots envy. I wanted to be like Alex Haley. I wanted to be able to trace my family back into the bowels of slavery, and then reverse the Middle Passage, and miraculously, on my mother's line, find out where in Africa we had descended from. But only Alex Haley could do that, right? I even met him. Quincy was a good friend of mine. And Quincy introduced me to Alex Haley, and I acted like I liked him. I acted like I wasn't envious and resentful and jealous. But I was. And I used to think, boy, that is one lucky fellow. Well, in the year 2000, I got a letter just out of the blue from a black geneticist at Howard University. His name is Dr. Rick Tibbs. "Dear Dr. Gates," the letter read, "have you ever seen Roots?" And I was like, what kind of idiots does this guy think I am? I teach black studies. Of course I've seen Roots. He continued, and he said, "What Alex Haley purported to do, we can now do scientifically. We can do it in a test tube, in a laboratory. And I'm looking for volunteers." I couldn't believe it. I called his brother. I said, "You have no idea," but you were talking to the right guy. I said, "I have been searching for my African roots since all my life almost. And I will do anything to be in your scientific sample." And I told him that if he dropped everything that he was doing and flew up from DC to Boston, I would pick him up at Logan Airport, which I did the next day. He came to my house, right on campus, and he went through all the razzmatazz about DNA. I go, yeah, just do it. And, I couldn't figure out why in the world was he having such a hard time getting volunteers. He told me he had been writing to prominent African-American men, and nobody was, willing to do it. And I would be doing him a big favor, if I said yes, and I said, well, you'd be doing me a bigger favor. So I agreed, and I go, what's next? He said, roll up your sleeve. I said, say what? Now, for those of you sitting right there, you can see I have fabulous veins, right? I've had a couple hip replacements. No one has ever had trouble tapping into these veins. No one except Dr. Rick Hitters. After 45 minutes of this brother trying to find my vein, I decided that I didn't really want to know where I was from in Africa that day. I will pass on my Kunta Kinte moment. Finally, remember this is 2000, finally he got enough blood, and that, as you all know, now you just spit and test it. But then, to get a sufficient amount of tissue, they had to take blood and fill up all these vials. So he filled up these vials, put them in a cooler with dry ice, went to Logan and just boarded the flight. That was before 9/11. I tell my students there was a time when there was no TSA. Now they can't believe me, you know, and that's an example. He took all that liquid on the plane, put it in the overhead, and thank God some big suitcase didn't bump in my blood. 6 months come and go, and I don't hear from Rick Hitters. And I'm calling his lab all the time. And finally, a friend of mine said, call him from another number. I did. I borrowed their cell phone. I called him from that number. As soon as I dialed his number, he picked up, Rick Hitters. I said, Rick, this is Skip Gates. He said, oh man, I was just about to call you. I said, yeah, brother. Where am I from in Africa? I'm on my Kunta Kinte. And he said, your results were so anomalous, we had to run them through the lab. I go, yeah, don't tell me all that BS. Tell me, where am I from in Africa? And he said, we now have 2,000 men in the database, and you're the only one who descends from the Nubian people. Now, all African Americans either want to be descended from one or two ethnic groups in Africa. One is the Nubian people. Now, Nubia runs from Khartoum. Nubia ran, it's the kingdom of Kush in the Bible. Nubia ran from what is now Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, up to what is now the Aswan Dam. Nubia and Egypt were bitter foes. Why? Because all of Egypt's gold, you know, young King Tut's tomb, right? All that gold came from Nubia. So they were always at war. And the Nubians were phenotypically black people. And the Egyptians always represented them in their iconography as being darker people. But the 25th dynasty, which obtained between 725 BC and 750 BC, the 25th dynasty of Egypt was the dynasty of the Black Pharaohs. Nubia defeated Egypt and consolidated the kingdom. And they painted themselves black in their statues, which have recently been unearthed. So you want to be descended from the pharaohs, right? You want to be descended from the black pharaohs that ran Egypt. Or you want to be descended from the Zulu people. And the Zulu people were in South Africa. Why the Zulu? Because Chaka Zulu, the great chief in the early 19th century, took the spear, which had been used like that, and he turned it into a weapon used like that, which made it devastatingly effective. Chaka Zulu consolidated the Zulu people. So you want to be descended from a black pharaoh or from a great warrior, right? So he said to me, we've analyzed 2,000 people, and you're the only one descended from the black pharaohs of Nubia. And ladies and gentlemen, this fit with my image of myself perfectly. Damn, that's what I'm talking about. I am descended from the pharaoh. When he sent me my certification of Nubianness, I had it framed, and my best friend is Kwame Anthony Appiah. He writes the ethicist column in the Sunday Times Magazine. We were students at Cambridge together, and he's the godfather of my children. Anthony's uncle, at the time, was the Asantehene, the king of the Asante people, the Ashanti in Ghana. And his grandfather on his mother's side, his mother's English, was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So he really is an aristocrat, blue blood on both sides. So he looked at my little certificate being descended from the pharaohs and looked at me and said, "What a ton of rubbish." And I said, "You're just jealous, brother, you're just jealous. I'm the man, you know." So, you know, I thought Mike was a little bit shaky. Why? Because, as I said, Nubia is over in East Africa, just south of Egypt. There's Ethiopia around there, right? So what did my ancestors do? Walk across the Sahara Desert in order to jump on a slave ship to get a free ride to America to pick cotton in Mississippi or Alabama? Do I look stupid? You know what I mean? No, none of our ancestors who were enslaved in this country came from the Sudan. And by the way, none came from Zululand or South Africa either. But that was all right. I had my certificate and that was that. 3 years later, I wake up, I don't mean to be indelicate, but 3 years later, I wake up to go to the bathroom. It's the middle of the night. And I'm standing in the bathroom, and I get an idea that was a gift from God. It's what's called, as you all know, an epiphany. And I'm standing in the bathroom, and I had an epiphany. And the epiphany was I could get 8 prominent African Americans, and I would trace their ancestry using the paper trail back into the abyss of slavery when the paper trail runs out. The paper trail runs out for everybody, but it definitely runs out for African Americans somewhere in slavery, right? And then when the paper trail ran out, I would do their DNA to see what ethnic group they were from in Africa. And I started, my tears just ran down my face. Before I walked in that bathroom, I did not have this idea. I got the idea. It was a gift from God. And I was so excited. I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't go back to sleep. So I went to bed, and I knew who I had to call. I wanted to call Quincy. And I wanted to call Quincy because, as I said, Quincy scored the music for Roots. Quincy introduced me to Alex Haley. But Quincy was a jazz musician, and jazz musicians are up all night. So Quincy was like a warlock, you know. I mean, when the sun would come up, that's when Quincy would go to bed. And so I waited patiently. If you wanted to do business with Quincy, you had to wait till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I waited impatiently till 3 o'clock, and I called. And this person answered the phone, and I said, "Can you let me speak to Q?" And he finally got on the phone. I said, "Q, what if I could do for you what Alex did for himself? And if I could raise the money, would you be in a documentary series if I can pull this off?" He was the very first person I called. He said, "Does it hurt?" And I did what you all would do, ladies and gentlemen. I lied and said, no, it doesn't hurt. Doesn't hurt at all. And then I wanted Quincy because he's Quincy Jones, and because of his connection to Alex Haley. But I also wanted him for another reason. Who is Quincy Jones' best friend? Does anybody know? No, an adult. I mean, before Michael was an adult. Oprah. And why did I need Oprah? Well, maybe it had something to do with the fact that I needed $6 million in order to do this show. So by this time, Rashida Jones was my student partner. And, you know, I said, Rashida's doing fine, you know, I'm just making up stuff because I really wanted to do this thing on the phone. And so I didn't want to embarrass myself, which I did anyway. But I said, Q, would you ask Oprah if she would be a guest in this hypothetical series? Remember, ladies and gentlemen, I was inventing a whole genre. It didn't exist. And I had to convince people that I could do it, and then raise the money for it. And so I said, would you ask Oprah if she'd be in the series? And he said, no. He said, but I'll do you one better. I'll give you Oprah's secret name and address. And I go, what am I supposed to do with that? He said, write her a snail mail letter. I thought, boy, I've gotten to brush off many times in my life, but this is my friend, and never colder than this. I thought that sending Oprah a letter in the United States mail was akin to putting a message in a bottle and tossing it into the Atlantic Ocean. So I went to bed thinking, this idea was just not meant to happen. So I went to bed, I was very sad, very frustrated. And the next day I woke up, what'd I do? I sat down and wrote Oprah a snail mail letter. I took it over to the Harvard Square post office, I put it in the mailbox myself. 6 months, again, come and go, no answer. So, speaking of football, Mr. President, in my graduate seminars, my students have a weekly response paper, one-page response paper, then they have a big paper at the end. And I like to grade these on Sunday afternoon watching the NFL. I happen to be a Detroit Lions fan because Sheila Ford Hamp and I were at Yale together. We're in the same secret society. She's one of my best friends. When she became principal owner, I became a Lions fan, right? So I'm hoping the Lions go to the Super Bowl. We can give up. Come on, you can give that up, right? Oh, no. Uh-oh. No, Steelers. Oh, wrong. Oh. I like the Steelers, too. I like the Steelers. So let me say, if the Patriots, how about that? If the New England Patriots, which I used to like before Sheila took over with the Lions, if the Patriots are winning, everybody gets in it. If the Patriots are losing, it's a bad day to be messing with Dr. Gates. So, in the middle of the game, my cell phone rang. And it was Quincy. And I said, Q, what's up? And a deep woman's voice said, Dr. Gates, this is Oprah Winfrey. I said, thank you, Jesus, thank you, Jesus. I knew the answer was yes. Why? Because I tell my students, I knew it was yes because rich people don't call you with bad news. If you ask a rich person for something, and the answer is no, assistant number 29 will call you and say, Miss Winfrey got your letter and the project's very interesting, but no. So Oprah was in. My whole pitch with Johnson & Johnson, which is my first and my continuous sponsor, I walked in to their boardroom, their executives, and I said, how would you like all of Johnson & Johnson's products to be associated with the whole world learning what ethnic group Oprah Winfrey's from in Africa? You see that circle up there, that light? Those executives looked at each other, and at that moment, it was like a giant ATM machine slowly ascending. They said, 6 million? Is that all you need? So I had my money, and if you look at this poster, there's Whoopi up on the left. Oprah told Whoopi about it, so Whoopi called my mother 19 times. And I said yes. That's Dr. Ben Carson, who was my classmate at Yale. Mae Jemison, the first black female astronaut, medical doctor, graduate of Stanford, Quincy. Oprah, Bishop T.D. Jakes, my homeboy from West Virginia, the televangelist. Chris Tucker, whom Quincy told about this, and my Harvard colleague, Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot. And I did their family trees, and you know what was funny? I thought that the whole narrative arc for each interview would be them finding out where they were from in Africa, which is, when you think about the culmination of roots, right? That he goes to Gambia and finds this village where ostensibly, his ancestors were from. But when I was filming Oprah, and I showed her the names of her enslaved ancestors, she burst into tears. And right on the spot, I reinvented the whole narrative arc of the series. So I got 8 prominent African Americans. I traced their their genealogy back to slavery, and then I did their DNA, and African American Lives was born. It was such a hit, PBS immediately came up with some money and asked me to do a sequel. So I did Maya Angelou, who was a good friend of mine, and was Oprah's best friend. I did Morgan Freeman, because anybody who plays God and the president, you got to do his DNA. It was a hit. So then I did Chris Rock. Chris Rock burst into tears when I showed him that his third great grandfather was elected to the South Carolina legislature in 1872 during Reconstruction. And so everything was great, and I was thinking about doing a sequel to African American Lives 3. And I got a letter from a lady who identified herself as being of Russian Jewish ancestry. And it went like this: Dear Dr. Gates, I've now watched season 1 and season 2 of African American Lives, and I have decided that you are a big fat racist. I've always admired your stances against anti-Semitism in the black community, for cultural pluralism and diversity, but you're just a racist because you only do black people. I couldn't believe it. You know, me. Somebody called me a racist. And she goes, why don't you do white people? Why don't you do Jewish people like me? And it never occurred to me, ladies and gentlemen. My whole brand, as it were, is African and African American studies. So it just had never crossed my mind that I could do this with anybody else. So Coca-Cola by this time had joined Johnson & Johnson as a sponsor. And I called our account representative, a black woman named Ingrid Saunders-Jones, who was just recently retired as the president of the Koch Foundation. And I got her on her cell phone, and I said, Ingrid, I'm holding this letter from this Jewish lady. It says I'm a racist. She said, what? She goes, why? I said, because we don't do white people. Can we do white people? Because if the sponsors were going to pay for it, we couldn't do white people. You know what I mean? So she said, just a minute, and hold on. And so I waited, and I thought the call had dropped because she didn't respond. So I said, Ingrid? Ingrid? So I'm shouting, Ingrid! And just as I was about to hang up, a little voice in a whisper said, Skip, I'm here. I was in a meeting, and I had to walk down the hall. I was in a meeting with a bunch of white people. I said, okay, well, what's the answer? What am I supposed to tell this lady? And she said, I only have one thing to say to you. And I said, what's that? And she said, there are a lot more white people drinking Coke than black people. I took that as a yes. And we completely reinvented the series. But then I had a problem, because white people come in kinds, right? You know, if you pick white people, what about Asian people? And what about Indian people? And, you know, Latino people? So I was very perplexed. And I thought about it, and then I decided, well, I know what to do. I'll do what Noah did. To Jews, to Catholics, to raisins. I swear to God. Yo-Yo Ma, Christy Yamaguchi. And we had reinvented it, and Finding Your Roots was born. And now, as I just said, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary, and Finding Your Roots is the #1 show on PBS. 4.5 million people watch Finding Your Roots. And by the way, Ed said to tell you all hi. We had, every year, I do 3 screenings, a big screening, at Loyola Marymount University in LA. And I picked 3 guests. And 2 weeks ago, it was Parents' Weekend at LMU, and I asked Ed if he would do it. So he was my guest. We showed it to 1,000 people, and then he and I were on the stage for an hour. And he had talked to me about Youngstown and its role in his life, but I told him I was coming here to see you guys, so he asked me to give you his love. He's a good guy, and I really like him. So I want to show you, with your indulgence, Mr. Professor, I picked 4 of my favorite moments in the history of finding your roots, and each is illustrative of a larger principle. As you've heard, I had no idea of where this thing was going to go. I was just trying to find out where I was from in Africa, and maybe who Jane Gates's lover was. But that was further down the road. And if I forget, you can ask me about that. All right? Okay, great. And but with the developments of DNA, particularly genetic genealogy, this thing morphed into ways I could not possibly have imagined when I had that epiphany in the middle of the night in my bathroom. And one way it's morphed is that we can get around what genealogists call brick walls quite often using DNA. And one obvious use of that, if you're adopted, it has already occurred to you. One obvious use of that would be to find a person's birth mother and birth father using DNA. And the first person who came to me and asked if we could do this was Taya Leone. And you know Taya from Modern Secretary, Madam Secretary.
So on the next page, I'm going to show you a chart that compares your mother's DNA to our tester's DNA. Any segments that they share will be highlighted in red.
Okay.
You ready to find out?
Yeah.
Would you please turn the page? You see a lot of red or you see little red?
I see a lot of red. Shared DNA, 26%.
And I said that if they shared 25%, then they shared a mother.
Right.
Your biological grandmother is a woman named Abilene Gindrat. I want to show you something. Will you turn the page?
Yeah. Who's that?
That's your grandmother.
God. She looks like my mom a lot. Boy, that is... I mean, even just the way she holds her head.
Really?
Yeah.
Taya's mother did not want her to do this. Taya's mother was born in Arkansas, adopted by a family almost immediately in Texas, upper middle class family, very privileged life. Taya argued with her for a couple years about approaching me, and she just did it. The episode aired. We tracked down Taya's grandmother, Taya's mother's mother, who was 98 years old. We tracked her down in Arkansas and arranged for a reunion, and so they got to see each other before she died. And there we go. One of the most difficult aspects, which you never see on the show, is one of the most difficult aspects of being the executive producer and the host of this series, is that I have to tell people sometimes very painful things about their biology. And the most painful is I have to call people and say, the man you called your father is not your biological father. You see, we have to do that. We have to do that off camera, because it's not the Jerry Springer show. You know what I'm talking about? You can't learn that, you know, with 4.5 million people watching, you know, in real time. So we tell them that and say, if you don't want this aired, you can drop out of the series. If you want to stay on the series, you have to go talk to your mother or your father or whoever is, you know, around and really relevant. And I definitely have had very prominent people who are so shocked who dropped out, and their identity is protected. All of our DNA data is coded, and only 3 of us have access to the code. But in LL's case, LL's name is Todd Smith. And when Quincy brought Rashida Jones for her freshman year, Todd was with them, and that's when I met him, and he and I are very good friends, which is why he agreed to be in the series. And I had to call him, he was on the set of NCIS, I had to call him to tell him that his mother had been adopted in 1947. Now, you'd say, well, that's not exactly like your daddy ain't your daddy, as black people say. Your daddy ain't your daddy, but your daddy don't know. But it was very heavy for Todd because his father and mother got in a big fight in the middle of the night. And his father shot his mother. When his mother got out of the hospital, she did a sensible thing and left this lunatic and moved in with her parents. So Todd, as far as he was concerned, his grandfather was like his father. And he wrote a memoir and he said that. And in his first video, My Mama Knocked You Out, a little old lady comes down the steps of, in the basement of the brownstone. His hobby's boxing. And at the very end, he's in the boxing ring, and at the end, she says, Todd, take the garbage out. And he loved these people so much. And I said, Todd, the people, your grandparents have no biological connection to you. Your mother, they adopted your mother. And he goes, what are you talking about? And I said, man, I don't know how to tell you. I know how close you are to your grandparents. They're still your grandparents, but they're not your biological grandparents. And he cussed me out. I mean, if he were here, he would tell you. I went, when I hung up, I thought, damn, I didn't count on this. This is too much. And before he hung up, he said, and he slammed the phone down, he said, well, what the hell am I supposed to do? And I said, if I were you, I'd call your mother and ask her if she ever thought about this. 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. I said, oh my God, this idiot's gonna yell at me all over the place. And I said, what'd she say, Todd? And she said, is it possible that my father is my biological father, but my mother is not my biological mother? Because she and her mother had a difficult relationship. And I knew from that she suspected that she had been adopted. And here's the story. When she was 12, her aunt had a baby, and all the women were in the parlor. And Todd's mother said, when I grow up, I want to have a baby that looks just like that. And the aunt said, honey, that's not possible. Isn't that cold? And that night she went to her mother and said, am I adopted? And her mother said no. She asked her mother 3 times, including on her mother's deathbed. And her mother said, no, you are my daughter. So she was relieved. We tracked down Todd's grandmother, Todd's mother's mother, living in a nursing home. She was 88. We got the guardian, who was a 25-year-old woman who graduated from college. My producer called and said, finding roots, da-da-da. We don't want to give anybody a heart attack, but your grandmother had a baby in 1947 in New York City and put her up for adoption. And we didn't tell her who Todd was, because that's a big revelation. And we said, we don't want to give anybody a heart attack, but you can process this information any way that you want. What are you going to do? She said, I'm going to call my grandmother. She called my grandmother and said, Grandma, Skip Gates said you had a baby and put it up for adoption. And the grandmother said, that wasn't me, it was my sister. Then she said, it was me. We reconnected Todd and his mother, and for the last 7 years of her life, this lady was able to live with the daughter that she had out of economic necessity to put up for adoption. And she didn't have to go to her grave with that guilt on her mind and in her heart. Isn't that amazing?
That's your mother's DNA compared to the DNA of a woman named Claudia Lewis. And the DNA that they shared is highlighted in red. And can you see how much red there is?
It's a lot of red, man.
Your mother and Claudia share 24.7% of their DNA. They are, without a doubt, half-siblings.
Wow. Claudia Lewis.
Claudia Lewis. Claudia Lewis is the daughter of Nathaniel Christie Lewis.
Wow.
That means that your mother's biological father was a man named Nathaniel Christie Lewis. He is your biological grandfather.
Yeah, That's heavy. I mean, you know, you couldn't have told me in 1,000 years, in 1,000,000 years that this was the case in my life.
Thanks to CeCe's genetic detective work, I can now introduce LL Cool J to the biological grandfather he never knew he had.
Wow. It's a good-looking dude.
You were looking at a photograph of your biological grandfather, Nathaniel Christie Lewis. You see any family resemblance?
Oh, definitely. Oh, yeah, I see it.
Really?
Yeah, his lips. Mm-hmm. You got them, that nose, he has the nose. You got the look. Oh, my goodness. I guess my first question would be, where were you? Mm-hmm. You know? The flip side is it's miraculous to be able to have this. This is such a blessing.
One of the reasons that I think Find Your Roots is popular, particularly with teachers, is that we're able to personalize grand events in world history, in American history, and European history. I'm very passionate about fighting anti-Semitism. I think that fighting all forms of hatred based on, all forms of hatred, period, but hatred's based on ethnic and religious differences. This is not what our country is about, ladies and gentlemen. We have to stand strong against those forms of hatred. So I like telling Holocaust stories, because we don't know in this country enough about the Holocaust, about the suffering of the Jews at the hands of the Nazis in the 30s and during World War II. So, it speaks for itself.
On November 2nd, 1942, the Germans and their collaborators surrounded the Bronx ghetto. Its inhabitants were loaded onto wagons and taken to a nearby town, where more than 2,000 of them were packed into trains bound for Treblinka, a concentration camp. Their fate was now sealed.
On the 10th, everyone is already in Treblinka. According to the evidence, all the Bronx Jews, men and women separately, breathed their last in the Treblinka gas chambers on the 10th of November, 1942, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Their bodies were burned in the crematorium in Treblinka. Oh my God. You know, I went there and I would say to people, I've been interviewed so many times, I said, I don't think any of my relatives died in the Holocaust. I was never given this information. This is, I don't have words. That's unbelievable. Almighty. That's unreal. Man. Whew.
Tell stories about horrors like this, whether it's the Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, the genocide going on in the Sudan now. Unless we tell that story over and over and over again in our classrooms and in forms of popular culture, it will happen again and again and again. Two more short clips. I was talking earlier to the members of the Historical Society at the little reception, and someone mentioned John Lewis. John Lewis was a friend of mine. John Lewis is the closest thing to a saint that I've ever met in my whole life. He was a good man. And this is President Obama giving him the National Medal of Freedom. But well, you'll see.
Advance toward the gate. See that they disperse.
The images captured that day in Selma are seared onto our national consciousness. And as we look at them today, it seems unbelievable that the African American right to vote could have posed such a profound threat as to incite this kind of violence.
The vote is the most powerful instrument, most powerful nonviolent tool in a democratic society. But knowing that a member of my family registered and voted in Alabama 100 years before I did, before my mother, my father, my grandparents. It's amazing. So maybe, just maybe, it's part of my DNA, my bloodline, or whatever you want to call it.
I mean, who would have believed that your ancestors were one of the pioneering people who voted in the state of Alabama among the former slaves?
It's just incredible. This is too much.
At that moment, I was in tears. Yeah, because that was so profoundly moving. Finally, one of our fun things, I always end, but these interviews with guests last 5 hours. You get 30 minutes. Edited down. We film 5 hours. We take a little lunch break for 30 minutes in between. We do their mother's side or their father's side, and we take a break, and we come back and do the other side. Then we have the DNA coda, and I tell them their admixture, you know, what percent Ashkenazi you are, what percent English, what percent Sub-Saharan African, or whatever. And then I tell them if they have a DNA cousin. And the DNA cousins are so much fun, because if you share long identical segments of DNA with you, that lady there, with you, that man there, and that means if you share a long identical segment of DNA with them, that means that you have a common ancestor. Even though you don't know it, even though we don't know it, we don't know who that might be. But if we had her ideally populated family tree and his ideally populated family tree, somebody would overlap. It's just a scientific fact. And not all the time do we find DNA cousins. We only examine the DNA of people who've been in the series, which at this point is well over 300 people. But often we find that they have a DNA cousin, and they often get together or they call each other, whatever. But the most famous of the DNA cousins.
The first test will reveal how Jewish you are. Mm-hmm. So out of 100%, how Jewish do you think you are?
I'd say 85.
Okay, let's turn the page. Can you read your percentage of Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry?
Wow, 97.
You're 97.8%.
97.7 Ashkenazi Jewish.
Basically, you're like Ivory soap. Their percentages were similar, but there was one uncanny surprise in store for each of them. Their genomes contained a startling finding. While comparing their DNA results to the results of other people we've tested, we found one significant match. Evidence within their own chromosomes of a relative neither suspected they shared.
We match your DNA against everybody who's been in any of my series. If you have long identical stretches, that means you're cousins.
Oh, I have some cousins?
Yep.
I hope it's a good athlete. What the hell?
You're kidding. Oh my God. That is unbelievable. It's true?
It's true.
Oh, that's so funny. That is really funny. That is amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah. All right, Cousin Bernie.
Cousin Bernie.
Yeah.
People say to me, they talk about Larry David, and I say, he does a better Bernie Sanders than I do.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Can you do a Larry David impression?
Yeah, me. I'm doing it. I thought it was pretty good. This is unbelievable.
I'm often asked why I think the series is so popular. I think, one, because we value storytelling, and we try to tell a good story. And each episode is constructed with a great narrative arc. But there are two subliminal political messages that I think are partly responsible for the series' great popularity. One is that what made this country great, ladies and gentlemen, is that we are a nation of immigrants. My immigrant ancestors didn't come here willingly, but they came here from elsewhere. They were unwilling migrants. And even our Native American sisters and brothers, their ancestors migrated across the Bering Strait 15,000 years ago. So we all are a nation we are a nation made great by the variety of the people who migrated here to seek and find a better life. And we have to protect that right. We have to protect that right. And the other reason is, despite our phenotypical differences, despite the color of your skin, the texture of your hair, the thickness of your lips, the shape of your nose, whether you're gay or you're straight or you're gender choice or trans or whatever bag you are coming out of, despite all of those differences, when we peel all the superficial layers away and get to the level of the genome, we are 99.9% the same, and that is a lesson that we have to tell our children in society every day. Thank you very much.
Because, you kind of left it all to talk about here. But, what's that? Oh, who was the lover? Yeah, I was gonna. Did you think I wasn't gonna ask? So start there.
Okay, great.
Start there.
I'm sorry, I don't want to do Marco Rubio drink out of the bottle, but remember how Marco drank out of the bottle?
I do.
But I did his history. My wife's Cuban, and she's a historian. She's over the hotel in Cleveland working, and she coordinates all of our Cuban genealogy too. So that's very, very exciting. Cece Moore, the blonde that you saw, who's a genius, who has solved over 300 cold cases. I heard her lecture 12 years ago at a conference on genealogy. I was delivering the keynote. She was introducing this new thing called genetic genealogy. And I was waiting for the limo to pick me up to take me to the airport to fly. We were in San Diego. to fly back to Boston. And, excuse me, I said, what the hell, I might as well listen to this. It blew me away. And I stood in line, patiently waited, and I asked if I could speak to her privately. And we were in like a Sheraton hotel, and the restaurant was dark because they didn't open till lunch. I took her in there with her husband and little boy, and I hired her on the spot because I knew that this would revolutionize what we were able to do. So that Téa Leoni, LL Cool J, Mandy, well, not Mandy's story, but obviously Bernie and Larry's story, all that was impossible when I started the series. That was all made possible through this new field called genetic genealogy, which allows you quite often to get around what genealogists call brick walls, when the paper trail, seemingly ends. So the ultimate question for me was, who was my great-great-grandfather? So when we did my DNA way back when, for a man, you have Y DNA, that's what makes all the men in this room men, is that we have Y DNA. Each in which all the men here inherit from their fathers. It's an identical genetic fingerprint, a genetic signature, and it never changes. We get our mitochondrial DNA, men and women, from our mothers, and it's identical, okay? And it never changes. That's how you use DNA to trace back through time. So I've known for years that the white guy, who was my great-great-grandfather, and who impregnated Jane, was Irish, because I have what's called the O'Neill haplotype. And my Y DNA is identical with 10% of all the men walking around in Dublin. So I knew that he was Irish, but that's all I knew. Cece worked 4 years, 4 years, building up family trees from matches. How many of you have taken either 23andMe or Family Tree or Ancestry.com? You have, okay. Well, you know you have. It'll tell you if you have siblings that you didn't know about, or that you know about. It would tell you if your father's your father, or your mother's your mother, or not. But it will also connect you to cousins. Second cousin, third cousin, fourth, sixth cousin. I used to think at the very beginning that there was nothing of interest in these third, fourth, fifth cousins. But that's where the gold is. So Cece builds family trees back from all these sixth cousins and fifth cousins, and figures out where you connect. It is laborious work. It takes a long time. And I love her, she loves me, we're very, very good friends, we're, partners in crime here. And she lives an anonymous life. I mean, she protects herself because there are a lot of people that like to see her no longer around, because she has solved over 300 cold cases. And she developed a methodology that was used for the Golden State serial killer. One of her associates, it's her methodology that was used. It's the same methodology, I'm trying to say. So, in the last weekend in April of this year, in Cumberland, Maryland, which you remember at the beginning is where all the Gateses are buried, 150 descendants of Jane Gates, all my cousins, descended on Cumberland. We took over a hotel. And then on the Sunday, Cece put me in the guest seat, and they were the audience, and she revealed the long-lost identity of my white great-great-grandfather. Isn't that great? Well, it will be revealed in the last episode. Everybody would have to sign an NDA, and I don't think we have that much time. But it will be in episode 10 of season 11. But it was a great, people cried, and, I know what my name would have been if they had been married, which of course was illegal. And I can now go back on that line to my 5th great grandfather, who was Irish, and it was very exciting. And somebody, a psychiatrist actually, my psychiatrist actually, said something to me that really knocked my socks off, which he said, Don't you realize that the whole reason you invented this series is to find the mystery that was set in motion? And I couldn't believe it, but he's absolutely right. That funny trauma that I experienced at my grandfather's open casket, you know, being embarrassed, look at how white he was, going to the graveyard, going to my grandparents' bedroom, the scrapbooks, all of that stuff. All of that led to the moment that I went into that bathroom and got the idea to do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Isn't that amazing? Isn't God good? That's God good. It's amazing.
You know, as you said, the show was astoundingly successful, and part of that appeal to you is this notion that we are a nation of immigrants, and you said that beautifully. And I would probably be remiss if I didn't ask you to reflect a little bit on, you know, we just came out of an election in which immigration was at the forefront.
We had an election?
Yeah.
I was traveling.
So, you know, immigration was at the forefront of that. Do you think our ideas about immigration are evolving or changing, or how would you reflect on that based on that statement you just made?
Well, I'm obviously I've been married twice, and I've gone through a divorce, and I made a series for PBS called Black in Latin America. Yeah. It's one of my favorite series. And there's 1 hour on Brazil, 1 hour on Cuba, 1 hour in Haiti and the DR, Dominican Republic, and 1 hour in Mexico and Peru. Because most of us don't know that there were black people even in Mexico and Peru. Here's an amazing takeaway. You can take this to the bank. Between 1515 and 1866, we now know that 12.5 million Africans embarked on slave ships and crossed the Atlantic. 12.5 million, okay? 15% die in the Middle Passage. That means 10.7 million get off the slave ships. All right. I'm going to ask you a question. And if you know the answer because you heard me or because you are a scholar, don't yell it out because I want people to have the same surprise that you all have, okay? So, of the 10.7 million Africans who came to the New World, that's North America, Latin America, and South America, how many came to the United States? Anybody? 4 million, that's good. Where's the president? President Johnson, where are you? Right there, Mr. President, take a guess. 2 million, that's a good guess. Mrs. Johnson, 1 million. I don't know if you're Mrs. Johnson. I don't want to be sexist. All right, we got 4 million, 2 million, 1. You know what the answer is? 388,000. Only 388,000 Africans came directly from Africa to the United States. Okay, so where did all these other Africans go? 5 million went to Brazil. 1 million went to Cuba. 1 million went to Jamaica. 772,000 went to a French colony. The richest colony in the history of the world was called Stambaugh, and on July 1st, 1804, it became the independent Republic of Haiti. Why did all those Africans go there? A 5-letter word, the world's first commodity crop, sugar. Sugar. Before the New World opened up, only rich people had ever tasted sugar. Kings and queens and bishops too, like the song said. Because it was so expensive. It's labor intensive, so you needed somebody to pick it. They tried Indians, they killed off the Indians, so they turned to Africa. And it made people phenomenally rich. That's why so many more Africans went to places south of Key West. Because sugar wasn't as big. Cotton, our big fortunes were made with the cotton treaty, mostly after 1830. Another thing, another little history lesson. We all have seen films about the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Tears, 5 so-called civilized tribes. Creek, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, and the Seminole.
lived on the richest cotton-growing soil maybe in the whole wide world. And in 1830, Andrew Jackson signed something called the Indian Removal Act that kicked them off this land so bad, and they went to what was called Indian Territory, which was their own country, ostensibly, which in 1907 became the state of Oklahoma. And that's when all of the cotton growing happened after they kicked the Native Americans off their land. So all that Rhett Butler, Gone with the Wind, there's plantation, all that economy developed on the land rightfully owned by the Native Americans. But they never tell you that in all those movies we've seen about the Trail of Tears. They never tell you what the real deal was. The real deal was about the Benjamins. It was about that land. So I'm doing my new Black History series, and I'm getting back to migration. My new Black History series will air in January. It's called The Great Migrations. And as you know, black people came to Youngstown and Pittsburgh and Detroit because of the automobile industry and factory jobs, right? And factory jobs in general from the Deep South. As of 1910, 90% of all African Americans lived in the former Confederacy. 9 out of 10 black people. And it was only when Henry Ford offered people $5 a day and all these factories started that people migrated north. Between 1910 and 1970, 6 million black people left the Deep South and came to the North and the West. Starting in 1970, they started to return in the South. Why? Because of the passage of the Civil Rights Act of '64, the Voting Rights Act of '65, and the invention of air conditioning. Sure, the affordability of air conditioning. Air conditioning, of course, was invented a long time before. And that made the South livable. So that's part 2 and 3 of the 4-hour series. What is the 4th hour? Between 1990 and the year 2000, more Africans migrated willingly to the United States than came to the United States over the entire course of the slave trade. Isn't that amazing? That's why when you watch basketball games or football games, you see all these African names. These are
openness to surprise and the unexpected as we navigate some uncertain times.
Well, I think that the saddest thing is when you see the sense of wonder that all of us are born with, when you see that it's been beaten out of people. And it's beaten out of people by, underfunded schools and, overcrowded schools or schools that are, where there's too much, where there's violence and where, the learning experience cannot be nurtured the way that it was for me, even in the hills of West Virginia. I had a great school. I mean, that little school produced me and a whole bunch of doctors and my brother, and it's an amazing thing. I think that's one of the saddest things. So I do everything I can to champion educational reform, to try to get it to be the environment where each of us can learn in our own way and be nurtured the way that we need to be nurtured in order to learn, in order to develop our minds. Everyone is teachable. Everyone is teachable. But the teachers don't have a chance. Like public schools, if you live in Princeton, New Jersey, or Stanford, Palo Alto, California, or Cambridge, Massachusetts, the public schools are like private schools, right? Because the rich neighborhoods, et cetera, et cetera. But there are all too few school districts like that. My mother used to write the obituaries for all the black people in the Potomac Valley. When a black person would die, our phone would ring, and her name was Pauline Augusta Holman. And they'd say, Pauline, so-and-so died, and she would write a eulogy, and she would go to church, you would go to their funeral, and the minister would call on her, and she'd stand up and read this she was a beautiful writer, and she would read this eulogy, and then the eulogy would be published in the newspaper as their
official obituary. And it was, my first model of a writer really was my mother. Before I started school in first grade, she would dress me up and I'd go to these funerals. And I remember one when my dad happened to be off. And so Mama read this eulogy, and my brother was in school. I hadn't started school yet. So I remember holding hands, and we were walking to our house. And my father said, "Pauline, you did a beautiful job today." And she said, "Thank you, Gates." She always called me Gates. She said, "Thank you, Gates." And he said, my dad said, "Yeah, it was so good at one moment, I started to get up and open the casket to see if that mean son of a bitch was still in there." And my mother laughed so much, and my father laughed, and I watched that sort of magic between them, and all produced by an act of writing. And when I wrote Color People, my memoir, which is my favorite book, I said that my mother's eulogies were so special because she wrote about people at their best. She wrote about all that was good about them, all that was wonderful about them before poverty or racism or whatever form of abuse had done so much to put out that light of wonder. In other words, my mother wrote about what you were like, the goodness that you harbored in your heart before the world took it away. I think that should be our goal for the education